Anyways, I know it might seem a little bit unusual to be starting things off with the bass since so many of you guys are guitar players, but I thought it would be really, really fun to do just talk a little bit about something that both bass players and guitar players can relate to, which is different ideas having to do with soloing and phrasing and a few different techniques that I really like to use when doing solo stuff. What I was planning on doing is just going ahead. I'm going to play a little bit for you guys for a couple of minutes. I have a really simple chord progression that I'm going to be playing along with. It's going to be E minor, then D major, G major, C major 7, and then a B dominant chord. Okay, so that's the progression I'm going to be playing over. And I'm just going to sort of bebop around solo a little bit for you guys. You guys can kind of watch what I'm doing, and then afterwards, I'm going to go over some of the ideas that I'm using, some of the approaches that I use to phrase and sort of come up with melodies on the fly, all that different kind of stuff. And then I know also last time we'd had a live event and I was a part of it, you guys had a ton of questions for me. We had a lot of Q&A and we weren't able to get to everything at that last live event, so I was going to leave a little bit more time this time to sort of do the Q&A back and forth with you guys. And then, of course, at the end, we have a bass to give away. Yeah, anyways, cool progression. We're going E minor, D, G, C major 7, B dominant. And play a little bit for you guys, and we'll sort of take it from there. Come on. There we go. So there you go. Just short little sort of some soloing ideas for you guys. I mean, that's a really common question that I get from students that I work with one-on-one is just sort of, stuff in the general realm of how do you solo? How do you come up with these phrases and melodies kind of on the fly? How do you come up with stuff that's sort of tasty, so to speak, riff-wise or melody-wise or whatever? And there's a lot of different ways to go about it. Again, this applies totally to bass and guitar both. I'm not really working off of, specific frets or shapes or anything like that. It's all more sort of conceptual stuff. So when we're looking at really any chord progression, like the one that I was just playing was a little bit more sort of bluesy or jazzy, but this will work really on anything, whether it's rock or blues or funk or hard rock or anything. There's a number of different approaches that you can take. One of my favorite ones is just playing around with your scale, just your basic scale. So like in the case of everything I was just playing, we're in the key of E minor, right? Pretty much all those chords fit over just our basic E minor scale. So E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. Or in intervals, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1, right? Okay. Again, scale applies both on guitar and on bass. So there's a lot of really, really cool things that you can do just with a scale. Namely, you can sort of move around within the scale. Like I'll for instance, pick a number of notes. Like if we're starting at the top of the scale and descending, right, going down. Let's say I want to play 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just going down the scale, right? Then go back up, say 2 notes, 1, 2, and start from there and go down 4 again. So down 4, up 2, down 4 again, up 2 again, and you end up with this really cool pattern that you can play through the course of the entire scale. And you can do that ascending, you can do that descending. See what I mean? And you can do that, again, it doesn't have to be 4 notes down and then 2 notes back up. It can be really any combination. That would be, a bit of a bigger jump or a smaller jump. Something like that, right? So there's a ton of stuff that you can find just within the context of a scale. Scales can seem sort of boring or just sort of like, technique exercises or something. But they really don't have to be. You can use them as these really cool creative tools. Right? And, you can jump around more than the scales. It's really, again, not a specific pattern, but just kind of an idea for you guys to run with and, find your own sort of phrases and your own voicings. And, you don't always have to start on the root note either. You can start. You can start anywhere within the scale on any of those scale degrees and sort of make it, into your own thing. You can go up, you can go down. However you want, and that's kind of where your own individual tastes and choices as a player can really come into their own. So that's scales, and one approach that you can use with scales. Another thing that I really, really like to do, and it's sort of related to scales, but has a bit of a different sound to it, is looking at our different arpeggios, right? So a quick recap for any of those who might not be familiar with the word arpeggio. If we think about the tones within our scale, right, the notes within our scale that outline the shape of the chord that we're playing. So in this case, again, we're in the key of E minor. So if we think about what makes an E minor chord an E minor, or sort of which scale degrees, if we're thinking about triads, right? We have our root, we have that flat 3, we have that 5, that 5th, and then we have our 7th, right, up on top. That's our arpeggio, right there, E minor arpeggio. Okay, and then you can take other notes within that scale and create arpeggios with those as well. So we know that the second note in our E minor scale is our F sharp, right? So that could be an arpeggio that we could play based off of our F sharp. Again, we're looking at it as sort of a triad. We're skipping around those notes. We're going 1, 3, 5, 7. So we're leaving out those in-between notes. We're leaving out the 4, the 2, we're leaving out the 4, we're leaving out the 6, etc. So we can create those shapes and those are all different tonalities that we can use in a solo as well. All over that E minor chord, right? So you can do all kinds of different stuff with arpeggios as well. It's another really, really great thing to sort of practice playing around with. And then another thing which you guys might have heard me doing a little bit when I was soloing there, and this is really when it comes to wanting to explore playing melodic, like really, really melodically, really kind of vocally, as far as, making it sound like you're really singing on your guitar, you can literally do exactly that, and we call that vocalization, okay? So, and this gets outside of scales or arpeggios or anything like that, and it's literally just, anybody can sort of sing or hum, even if you're not a great singer, per se, you can still get the point across. Anybody can get some kind of a melody going. And using that, like science has shown that when we're playing music and when we're talking, we're actually using the same center of our brain. Both of those things are using the sort of the linguistic center in the brain, which is why it can be really hard to talk to somebody while you're playing. If you're at home practicing and your wife or a friend or something comes in and is trying to ask you a question, you kind of have to finish what you're doing and then you can talk. That's because both your playing and your talking are accessing that same center of your brain. So we can actually use that to our advantage when we're trying to improvise or when we're trying to play a solo or come up with a melody. In that, you can just sort of sing. It's very easy sometimes for people to just sort of hum a random melody because we've been talking our whole lives with, that part of our brain is very, very good at, speaking English, for instance, or whatever your native language is. And because all languages are a little bit tonal, all languages have a little bit of a melody to them. And we can use that part of our brain to our advantage. And just sort of, you can start just by singing. We can just play. Again, I'm not a great singer, but. Right? Something like that. I'm just singing and then playing what I'm singing as I'm sort of saying it. And it can take some practice to get to that point, but you can sort of start to practice that by just, again, no embarrassment. You don't have to be an amazing singer or perfectly on pitch. Just sort of start trying to sing melodies or sing phrase ideas and stuff along with whatever it is you're trying to play over, whether it's a play-along track or a chord progression that you've written. And a really, really great practice tool for this, which is what I'm using. You guys can't see it because it's here at my feet, but is a loop pedal. This, if you guys are wanting to practice your phrasing and your soloing over basic chord progressions, loop pedal is incredible because you can do exactly what I just did. You can record just yourself playing that progression, and then right? And it'll just go behind you, and it frees you up to be able to practice whatever you want, and it'll go, for an hour if you want it to. So great tool there. But especially doing something like that, just let it go, and without even worrying about playing at first, just try singing, really whatever. Just kind of, open up the doors and let yourself go and sing anything that comes to mind. And then you can sort of, especially if you've been practicing your scales and stuff like that, it'll become easier and easier for your fingers to translate what your brain is thinking as far as a melody goes. So, just a couple cool sort of generalized ideas for soloing and phrasing that, again, I'm really hoping anybody can take advantage of. Guitar or bass, any genre, everything from metal to country, you can use these kinds of ideas and techniques. And I could go for hours about, more advanced theory stuff, but to me, the best soloing is simple a lot of the time. We all love to shred and guys that can go really fast and play things, sort of virtuosically. But to me, the stuff that really connects and impacts as a soloist, we think of B.B. King and how B.B. King could say more than most guitar players on earth with one note. than a lot of guys can with, playing all the notes in the world. So especially if you're interested in that kind of soloing, these are all really useful techniques for that, or useful ideas. So hopefully there's a couple cool seeds for you guys in there. And now I'm wondering, do we have any questions going on as of yet?
We do. We have quite a few questions.
Excellent.
2 minutes. Yeah, that is true.
So I wanted to give it plenty of time, because I remember in the last event we didn't get to a ton of them. So
all right, well we'll kick it off here.
Excellent. Put
the first one up here from Just John, and the question is, what do you think of acoustic basses? I'm thinking about buying one.
Indeed. I am assuming that you're meaning acoustic bass guitars, as far as, something that looks like an acoustic guitar but is strung like a bass. I think they're really cool. They're really useful for certain scenarios. For example, jam sessions, maybe like around a campfire or backyard or in a garage where you might not have access to an amp in particular, because they're a lot louder. They've got the big acoustic body on them. So you don't necessarily need amplification. So I think they're really useful tools. They can be a little bit tricky to play, just because the nature of how they're built, the string tension ends up being a little bit different. And a lot of them that I've played, the strings are, they're tuned to the same pitches, obviously, but they can be a little bit stiffer, and the necks can be a little bit stiffer than your normal electric bass. So if you're used to something like a jazz bass or a precision bass, it might be a tiny bit of a transition. You might find yourself going, this thing is a little bit uncomfortable, but your hands will get used to it. And, again, if you find yourself often playing with other acoustic players, whether they're acoustic guitarists or percussionists, or you find yourself, in nature or wherever that, you don't necessarily have a lot of access to amplification and needing to play a lot or wanting to jam with people in a situation like that, then they can be invaluable. And also, I've been really curious to hear if any bass players are taking those acoustic basses and doing what some of these modern acoustic guitarists are doing with, really cool tapping patterns, open tunings, drumming on the body. There's so many cool acoustic guitar techniques that I feel like could be translated to acoustic bass. So that is another thing you could explore. But I'd say go for it. I think they're cool instruments. They definitely have their place and their purpose. And so there you go.
All right, here's a great question from Bjorn Johansson.
Indeed.
What should guitar players know about the bass?
Well, hello, Bjorn. Thank you very much for tuning in. What should guitar players know about the bass? That is an excellent question, and one I could answer in a lot of different ways. But I think, in my experience, especially as sort of a gigging player playing with a lot of different people, the one thing that I find myself conveying to guitar players is that bass players are much more theory-oriented. We're much more rooted in understanding music theory on a bit of a deeper level. Not to say at all that guitar players don't, because there's boatloads of guitar players out there who are really incredible with their theory knowledge. And, especially if you're getting into jazz or funk guitar, you have to know a lot about chord voicings and other, elements of music theory. But just especially on more of a, if you're kind of jamming with your friends or doing open mics or anything like that, I think guitar, it's a lot easier to take a guitar and you can learn the shapes of the chords, and just based on those, you can learn to play a lot of songs. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think that a big miscommunication kind of disconnect can happen when you've got a guitar player who's maybe a little bit more rooted in just, well, I know a G shape and I know a D shape and I know a C shape and a minor bar, and using those shapes I can play all these different songs. And then you might have a bass player coming in who's going, well, yeah, but what scale do I need to play over that? What voicing are you playing? How is the chord laid out? Just different, a little bit more theoretical, so to speak, elements of what's going on. Bass players are usually thinking more from that perspective than a guitar player is, again, just because of the nature of the instrument. Since we're only playing one note at a time, it seems simpler, and it is as an action, but what we have to understand as bass players about music and about how to create and structure a bass line that works really, really well under whether it's a blues tune or a rock, classic rock tune or whatever, we have to be thinking about, okay, well, here are my scale degrees, here's my triad that is sort of outlining, the key that we're in or the tonality of the chord that we're playing. That's really where we're approaching things as a bass player is much more rooted in theory necessarily than I think a lot of beginning guitar players find themselves thinking. Which again, it's not a thing of saying one is right or one is wrong or it's better to know lots about theory. It's it's totally up to you and the kind of music that you want to play and all that. But I think that's one thing that all guitar players should always keep in mind about bass players is that we're more rooted in analyzing things from that kind of an avenue, as opposed to just thinking about roots. We're thinking about scales. We're thinking about intervals. We're thinking about triads. We're thinking about voicings, and all that kind of stuff. So that would be one thing that I would.
So we shouldn't believe all those jokes or memes that we see about bass players not being musicians. In other words,
no, you should not. At least bass players worth their salt. I mean, you can definitely, you can do the same kind of a thing on bass. Where you're like, oh, that's G, that's C, that's D. Now I can play Rolling Stones or whatever, and that does happen. Again, nothing wrong with that either. But most guys, like if anybody out there is watching who follows any of the courses that I do on JamPlay, they're all very much geared towards understanding that, what is a major scale, what is a minor scale, what comprises those things, how do they work, how do they relate to each other. So, yeah, that's the spiel there, I guess.
All right. Let's see. Next one is from Sean Haynes, sorry. What kind of wood is that bass body? And we had a couple of questions about your bass.
Basically, everybody wants to know about your bass.
Yes, indeed. So this bass was custom built for me. It is very similar. It is not made by Federa. There might be a couple guys out there who are thinking that it's a Federa. Federas are gorgeous instruments, but they're very, very expensive. I did not happen to have $12,000 to spend on a bass, so this was built by another company for me. But it is heavily influenced by, designed by a company called Federa, based out of New York. So the body is alder. This is alder. The neck we have, this is cherry, maple, and then there is a maple cap on the body here that you can see, and then the top is spalted maple, and then there's also wenge as part of the body. You can see this sort of little brown stripe here, or you can see this brown stripe running through the whole body. So it's a multiply laminate body, maple, wenge, and alder. The neck is cherry and maple, and it is a dovetail joint where the neck comes into the body, so it sort of gives you the sustain of a neck through, but the added benefits of the punchiness, sort of a bolt-on construction. And then it has a rosewood fretboard, spalted maple headstock veneer as well. So yeah, and if you guys are wondering about the pickup configuration, there are not 3 pickups. This is actually what we call a ramp. So this is just sort of an arbitrary piece of wood that doesn't really do anything except it lets me rest my thumb there. And also, as bass players will tell you, since we play with our fingers so much, in this area here where you don't have the pickups, there's a pretty significant distance between the string and the body. So when I strike, my finger there has a tendency to go down further, and I have to sort of pull it back out to strike the next note. The advantage of a ramp is that your finger always stays sort of in the optimal position to attack the string. And we also govern the tone of our bass quite a bit by where we play. Down here, if I'm playing over the bridge pickup, it sort of has a burpy, very mid-rangey sound, whereas if I'm playing over the neck pickup, it has a much fuller, more sort of low-end sound. So if I was playing classic rock or reggae, I might be playing over the neck pickup for that big low bass tone, as opposed to if I'm playing jazz or funk. I might go over that bridge pickup to get a little bit more of that kind of mid-range tone. So, and then I've got ton of different options with my electronics. I won't even get into that because it's kind of crazy. But I got coil taps and active passive and a mid contour and all kinds of fun stuff down there. But ultimately custom made alder body with maple, wenge. Spalted maple is this wood here, really pretty, cool kind of figured wood on top is spalted maple. So yeah. That's the story on the bass. And it's a 5-string, but I actually have it tuned E, A, D, G, C. So I have a high C string as opposed to most 5-string basses, which would have a low B string. I like to go higher so I can play really nice chord voicings. And, do really high. And I have 26 frets as well. So I can go all the way up here to a high D, which is really neat. So, a lot of custom features that I've got on this guy, and kind of for my style of playing.
We've had a lot of questions about how you tune a 5-string bass. So if you want to just cover that real quick, since you mentioned it.
So typically, a 5-string will have a lower string. Like your normal 4-string bass is the same as your 4 lowest strings on a guitar: E, A, D, G, right? Ascending in pitch, low E, A, D, high G. A normal 5-string bass will add a lower string, which is a low B, okay? So then from low to high you have low B, E, A, D, G. I go the other direction and I add a high C string. And for guitar players, you guys are going, but why isn't it a B like a guitar where it's E, A, D, E, A, D, G, B, E like a guitar? I go to C instead because it keeps everything tuned in fourths. So I can take all of our scale patterns and no matter where I play them over the neck, because all the strings are always in consistent proportion to one another pitch-wise, whatever patterns I'm doing apply no matter what key, no matter what fret I'm starting on, any fretting pattern that I know will apply anywhere all over the neck. So that's why we keep our basses tuned in what we call parallel fourths. There's a fourth between E and a fourth between A and D, a fourth between D and G, and a fourth between G and C. So whether it's a low B string like a traditional 5-string bass or how I have this one set up with that high C string, same thing applies. I like the high C because I can get really nice, cool chord voicings that you might not be able to do on a normal bass because it goes so much lower. So.
All right.
Yeah. So.
Okay, our next question is from Ralphie Sawyer. And the question is bass for people with fat fingers?
That is an excellent question, Ralphie. Absolutely not. I will tell you a story to answer this question. And I was, a number of years ago, I was in New York City watching a very well-known jazz fusion guitar player named Wayne Krantz. Okay, he was playing at a place called the 55 Bar, which is in the West Village in New York City. If you guys ever get the chance to go to the 55, I highly recommend it because it is a tiny bar, and on any given night, you will see some of the greatest musicians in the world in there playing some really incredible music. On this particular night, it was a guitar player named Wayne Krantz. Again, check him out if you haven't yet. He was playing with just a trio. So it was him, a drummer named Cliff Almond, who's great, and a bass player named Tal Wilkenfeld. Now, if you guys out there have not heard of Tal, she is Australian. She is, I think, 24 or 25 now, so my age. And she is just a mind-blowing bass player. Absolutely incredible. Plays a 4-string jazz bass. And, I mean, can shred with the best of them. Her big kind of break was Jeff Beck. If you guys know Jeff Beck, legendary jazz fusion guitarist, hired her and took her to the Crossroads. She performed with Jeff Beck at Crossroads, the big Eric Clapton festival. And she went out and took this bass solo that went viral online, and just everybody. I mean, she was on the cover of Bass Musician magazine, Bass Player magazine. getting interviewed by all these forums, getting endorsements across the board. Got endorsed by EBS amps and endorsed by Fender and all this stuff. And I got to meet Tal at this show in New York at the 55. And I went up and shook her hand and had to do like total triple take because this chick was about 5'2", and I put my hand up to hers, and her middle finger came up to there on my hand. That big was her entire hand, and she manhandles a jazz bass better. I'm 6 foot. I'm a pretty stocky guy, but she came up to about here on me, and then these tiny, tiny little hands, very thin, delicate fingers, and then she got up and just manhandled this jazz bass for the entire show, and it was mind-blowing to watch. So long story short, no, you do not need fat fingers to play the bass. You can have any size hand and be any size person. On the flip side of that, famous funk bass player Stanley Clarke is like 6'8" and has hands that are the size of my arms. So really, it runs the gamut. I know it seems like, especially with how big the strings are, how long the neck is compared to a guitar, it seems like something only kind of bigger guys or gals, for that matter, would want to take on. And generally, yes, you don't see a ton of bass players who are very, short or slender or have very small hands. But by no means do you need to have massive hands just to play the instrument. It can be done by anybody. So excellent question and common misconception about the bass. So thanks for tuning in, Ralph. Appreciate it.
All right. Next question is kind of back to the old 4 or 5 string question. Which is easier to play, the 4 or 5 string bass?
I really wouldn't assign either one an easier title. They're really, if anything, if you forced my hand, I would say the 5 string is a little bit trickier just because the neck is wider. But as long as you're playing with proper technique, and you've got your nice, I always call it the taco shape or the sandwich shape, and you've got good support on the back of your neck with your thumb, you're not going to see a huge difference. The fretboard and the neck on a 5-string will feel wider, but not so much so that it sort of prohibits you from being able to play it. Excuse me. The bigger differentiation I make between 4 and 5-string bass is what you're trying to do. Like I said earlier, don't think about my bass because it's kind of unique because I have that high string on it. But generally speaking, a normal 5-string bass with that lower B string is going to be used a little bit more in harder, louder styles of music. So hard rock, modern country, stuff that's you've got a full band, you've got a big drum set, you've got electric guitars, and you need those really low notes. They're going to power through and really shake the whole room. Whereas something like jazz or funk or sort of lighter styles of music, sort of lighter, so to speak, are going to be, you're going to be fine with just a 4-string because you don't need to go all the way down to these super low notes. And you can just, you can get away fine with your normal 4 strings. So one harder than or easier than the other. The 5-string is wider, so that could be a bit of a challenge. But beyond that, they're basically the same. It's just more about what you're trying to do with the instrument as opposed to how it is strung. So hopefully that's helpful info for you there.
All right. Okay, we have a special announcement from Jeff or Jason here.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to let you guys know we will be announcing the giveaway winner for the Yamaha bass in about a little bit less than 10 minutes at this point. So,
yes.
As per the rules, the only thing that you have to do to get entered is meaningfully participate in the discussion or the lesson. So if you haven't done that, do so now, and you will be then entered, and we will randomly draw that before we announce the winner.
And just to encourage you guys, well, maybe I won't encourage you, but to give you a little sneak peek, a little tension to build some anticipation, the first letter of the first winner's name starts with a B. B. And we also have 3 runners-up chosen because you have to be here. So just let that sink in. Just let it sink in if your name starts with a B.
Yeah, and in between questions here, I'll take just a second to tell you guys a little bit about this bass. It is by Yamaha, has dual coil pickups, EQ section. Very, very, very nice bass. I was playing it a little bit earlier, and we can plug it in here in a little bit. I'll tune it up so you guys can hear it a little bit. But Yeah, it's this nice metallic gray sort of finish. Really nice laminated neck. So yes, username starting with a B. You're going to be very, very happy with this bass when we get to that in just a moment here. But in the meantime,
some acrobatics by
yes, exactly.
Alex. Okay, let's get back to the questions before we give away the bass. We can get a couple more in here probably. Mm-hmm. This one's from Luke the Blues Man. Alex, do you play the guitar as well? And if so, has either helped your playing on the other?
I do play a little bit of guitar, not enough to really properly call myself a guitarist, but enough to get around and, do the basics. I know all the basic chord shapes and that stuff, and then a lot of the soloing stuff that I do on bass, I also do on guitar. Obviously, stringing's more or less the same, tuning's more or less the same. The biggest challenge for me is I really never did anything with a pick on bass. So I play guitar finger style with my thumb and middle and index fingers. Like that kind of a thing. So yeah, they've definitely helped. Bass has helped me on guitar just because I learned everything on bass, and then I've been able to translate a lot of that to guitar. Messing around a lot more on guitar has helped my bass playing just as far as thinking more about chord voicings, chord structures, really getting a feel when it comes to playing with a band. Because so much of what I do, I teach here at JamPlay, but really my main thing is that I tour and perform nationally with all different kinds of bands, particularly with funk and classic rock, kind of in that world. And picking up more guitar has definitely helped me understand sort of where guitar players are playing in the frequency spectrum. And when you guys are phrasing sort of smaller chords, or you're comping up higher and doing stuff like that, learning that stuff has helped me think, oh, okay, well, if you're there, then I can kind of be here, and complement what you're doing more when I'm just playing, bass normally in a band. So that's been a really, really cool perspective to get. And then, also dealing with things like effects, working a little bit more with guitar and thinking more about guitar has helped me branch out a little bit more into thinking about that kind of stuff, pedals, amp settings, all that kind of stuff. Because, on the bass, not that stuff doesn't matter. You're just doing a little bit less with it because you just want it to sound like a bass. And you can tweak it here and there and, bring out certain elements. But it's not like guitar where you've got delays and reverbs and distortion and octave pedals and, tube amps and high gain channels and clean channels and vibrato and tremolo and all that stuff. Bass players usually don't deal with that stuff nearly as much. So it's been a nice branching out to learn a little bit more about that stuff. So yeah, I think there's a ton of applicability between the two. Obviously, on a basic level because they're tuned very similarly, but then also, again, stuff like effects, stuff like paying attention to where your guitar player is phrasing his chords and his voicing his chords as opposed to where you're playing as a bass player, how that all kind of fits together in a band. So yeah, there's so much to be learned between the two. That's definitely true.
All right. Next one is from Guitar Pretender.
Indeed.
And the question is there a difference between 60s bass sounds and those of today?
Well, hello, Guitar Pretender. Good to see you. Yes, there are definitely differences between the tones that guys were getting in the 60s, especially coming to mind are tones on, Stones records, Beatles, Paul McCartney, John Entwistle, yes, The Who, all the classic 60s bands. I would say the biggest difference between back then and now was a couple of things. A lot of the basses back then were what we call short scale basses, so their necks were a little bit shorter than modern basses are. They were a little bit closer to guitar-sized necks. Not all of them, Hofner's and early Fenders were sort of the scale length that we think of today, but there were a lot of basses back then that were short scale basses. And when you shorten the scale length on these strings, you're not changing the pitch or the tuning, but the feel of the strings is different. There's a different amount of tension, as far as like PSI goes. There's a different tension on the strings, so that changes your tone a little bit. Another really big difference was that they hadn't particularly invented solid-state amplification yet. Everybody was still running through tube amps, even bass players. And you will see a lot of bass guys still using tube amps to this day, but like I play an exclusively solid-state rig. A lot of bass players nowadays play solid-state. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, tube versus solid-state, they're the big old vacuum tubes that you'll see in vintage electronic gear. And back then they were used to provide all the power and kind of do all the electrical work inside your amplifier. And tubes have a very particular sound. You can think of it as sort of warm and gushy. They distort a lot easier than solid-state systems do. And when tubes distort, they sound nice. It's like you can think of a good distorted guitar tone like on a rock record or something. A lot of times that's coming from the tubes being driven too hard and breaking up. On bass, for me personally, I don't really like the sound of tubes nearly as much because it can sound sort of fuzzy and a little bit muddy. You don't get as much definition out of your tone as you might through a solid-state system, which doesn't behave in the same way as tubes do. But really early amps like the Fender Bassman Fender Bassman and all different kinds of stuff were totally tube designs. So you had everybody on stage running through tube amps, and that lent everything a very particular sound. Through the 70s and particularly getting into the 80s and 90s, you had a lot more solid-state designs coming out. You had 5-string basses coming out, 6-string even basses coming out. People were getting more advanced with bass electronics, doing active pickups, EQ on board the bass, all that kind of stuff. So, those sort of vintage bass tones were a lot more geared in the tube, in the passive short scale, whereas modern stuff, we have all of our wonderful modern amenities of solid state and EQ technology. So, good ear for hearing that. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in, brother. Appreciate it.
Is the mic on?
Is the mic on?
Friends, this
Jeff.
is the time you've all been waiting for.
Oh, is it?
We're just going to reiterate the rules real quick so people don't wonder why they didn't win. The rules of these giveaways are you have to be in the live stream interacting with the teacher. Ask a question, use a useful comment, help out another user. If you help another user out with their question, great. And when we announce the winner, you have to be here. So we are going to post the winner in both the live stream chat and we're going to announce it on video. And they have 2 minutes to respond. If they do not respond, it moves on to the runner-up. So what we need to ask you guys is to please keep the chat room quiet. Seriously, please keep the chat room quiet. I'm going to type out a message to the user in the live stream and then announce it here, and we will be good to go. Can you remind me which model Yamaha that is, Alex?
This is the TRBX 304. TRBX 304. So like I was saying earlier, we've got really nice laminate neck, looks like probably maple and cherry, very well made, clearly properly quarter-sawn. Rosewood fretboard looks like nice big dual coil pickups with nice big magnets for a ton of gain. You might actually, Captain Chris, you might want to bring back the gain on this bass here. And then you've got, it looks like some really, really cool EQ options. Yeah, definitely. So we've got pickup blend here. So we're going neck pickup, both pickups, bridge pickups. You got a nice blend function there. This is going to be your bass. This is going to be your treble control. So boost or cut on the bass, boost or cut on the treble. And then you've got this really interesting sort of EQ selector here. So we've got a lot of different options. We've got slap, which will be good for... maybe bring that back up a little bit.
All right, well, Alex is doing some slapping. We got to announce this winner, and then you'll have 2 minutes to talk about the guitar.
Yes.
The winner is Beth Dean. Beth Dean, you have 2 minutes from the second it was posted in the chat to respond and let us know you're from the U.S., Canada, or Mexico. As a reminder, if somebody from outside the U.S. wins, we do have a runner-up prize for them, and then we will move on to the next person for the actual guitar. Beth Dean is here. Are you from North America? Just let us know, please. Very quick. Beth, are you from North America? or Mexico. I consider Mexico North America, but
North America.
It is North America.
we gotta verify where you're at before everyone gets too excited. New Jersey, we've got a winner.
New Jersey.
Beth,
Boom.
Beth. Email
Beth.
support@jamplay.com with your shipping information. That's your bass.
Congratulations, Beth. This is just sitting here playing it for a second. This is a wonderful bass. Got a ton of really, really cool electronics options in particular. It is active, so it'll take that 9-volt battery, give you a little bit more volume, a lot more tonal options, and really nice fit and finish. It plays great, so the action's really, really nice. Very easy to play. So you are going to enjoy the heck out of this bass. Congratulations. Awesome job. And yeah, I don't even know what time it is. Is that about up it for us, or are we getting to a couple more questions? Or
Maybe one more.
Yeah, I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Okay, great. Well, congratulations, Beth. I'm going to switch back over to my bass, and we'll keep rolling on some questions. Alrighty.
All right, this one's from BD Seagull. If you were a guitar player who wanted to pick up the bass on a rare occasion, is it too simple to say just pick the bass walks, just play the bass walks and the boom of the boom chuck?
I mean, it all depends on where you're coming from as a guitar player. I mean, like I was saying a little bit earlier, on bass, we are a little bit more concerned with music theory. So if you've got a good handle on music theory as a guitar player, you know your way around scales, you know your way around arpeggios, you know chords, you know how major and minor chords relate. Yeah, there's really no reason that you can't pick up a bass and at least, get around on it. Use your pick and, yeah, just... play simple bass stuff. If you're familiar with the chords and where the notes lay on the bass and all that kind of stuff, you have a good idea of how bass players do what they do. Yeah, it's really not that hard of a gap to jump. But if you're coming from guitar, a bit more of a perspective of, I know this shape and I know this shape. And that's kind of where my guitar playing comes from, is just, more learning the shapes of the songs. And you don't know as much maybe about chords or what have you. It's going to be a little bit trickier because, again, just playing a big chord shape as opposed to picking out the specific notes, knowing which each note is, how it relates to the chord that's being played. You do kind of need to have that basic information down before you can really come in and be a competent bass player, or at least an occasional bass player. So I would say that if you're just looking to do it occasionally, study up just a little bit on that stuff. You don't have to be a master's degree level musical theoretician or whatever you would call it. In order to get the gist of it, but I would do a little bit of learning in terms of basic music theory, and that'll help you understand the role of the bass in music a whole lot, and will let you make that jump a little bit easier. So, but yeah.
Okay. We have time for one more, Jason. What do you think?
Yeah, in fact, I think we have time probably for two more, since we're kind of on like a 10-minute offset.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great.
All right. Well, the next one here is kind of an interesting question from Patrick 419. If you as a bass player are playing way up the neck, where would the lead guitar play to pop out, since you're consuming more of the music spectrum? 6th fret on up or so?
Excellent question, Patrick. Thanks for tuning in. I mean, the thing that you have to remember first and foremost is that everything I'm doing is an octave lower than where the guitar is. So even if I'm on, say, 8th fret E string on my bass, that is still much lower than your guitar even goes. So your guitar doesn't actually start to sound until I play my 7th fret A string. So a really common technique that I'll use is, playing, for instance, up here. Because when we play on our higher frets, it gives the bass a bit of a different sound. It gives it a bit of a deeper, sort of throatier sound. But still, that is a full octave lower than the D string on your guitar or your 5th fret A string. So in that kind of a circumstance, you're still going to end up being higher. Now, if I'm playing up here, say my 10th fret D string, that's going to be the equivalent of your 3rd fret A string. So what's pretty high up on a higher string, high up on the neck for me, is still a pretty low note for, the equivalent of that there for you. So again, guitar player just needs to move up a little bit. And like if the guitar player is up playing, if you're up on your B and E strings, your highest strings, and you're playing stuff up there, my bass can't even physically go that high. So you're significantly higher than I would even be able to do. This exact bass in me as a player is a little bit different because I have this high C string. I'm just speaking as far as most bass players go. So it becomes a little bit easier than you might think for everybody to sort of stay in their own regions. The other thing is that if you've got a bass player running through a bass amp and a guitar player running through a guitar amp, just the nature of sort of the sound and the timbre of those instruments is going to create a lot of distinction between them. Guitars are a lot twangier. They emphasize those high frequencies a lot more. So even if we're actually playing the same note together, you're still going to hear quite a bit of difference because you've got a thinner string, you've got a smaller instrument, and you've got an amplifier that's designed a lot differently, as opposed to on the bass, you've got a much larger instrument, much bigger string, and again, an amplifier that's designed to accentuate bass frequencies. So even if we're playing the same note, there's still going to be a frequency difference just because of how the instruments are designed and their natural timbres. And that goes a long way to create your sort of distinction too. So if you're coming from the perspective of a bass player, don't shy away from playing high on the neck for all the reasons I just mentioned. And if you're a guitar player and you see the bass player maybe going a little bit higher, or if you start to hear clashing a little bit, just move your voicing for your chord up a little bit. If you're playing your major chord here, play it here. That kind of a thing. And that'll sort of keep some good space and distance between those two things for you. So hopefully that helps. A little more info for you.
All right, let's squeeze another one in here.
Okay, cool.
This one's from Carl, and we know the answer to this because you played some chords on the backing track you did earlier, but maybe you could expand on playing chords on the bass.
Sure, absolutely. So yes, you definitely play chords on the bass. And this I recorded actually earlier through the loop pedal. I don't know if you might want to boost that volume just a little bit so that they can really hear properly. Yeah, there we go. So that is just my version of an E minor. On the guitar, you think E minor is sort of here, 2nd fret A and D string, and then all the other strings open. My E minor looks like that. So it's sort of a 7th fret bar almost, 7th fret A string, and then I've got a G up here and a D, or I can do that. So chords on bass are a lot more about individual notes as or sort of fewer notes between everything, as opposed to playing all your strings and you've got all 6 notes in there. I'll only use 3 notes at a time, or even just 2. Just 2 notes, at most maybe 4, but it's pretty hard for me to get a chord that incorporates all 5 strings. It can be done, but your voicings are pretty limited. So I usually end up with, about 3 notes, maybe 4 if I'm feeling fancy. And you just have to think about your voicings and how the notes are laid out a little bit differently than you do on guitar. But you can definitely do chords on the bass. And I like doing chords quite a bit, and that's actually why I have this bass set up the way that it does, and the way that I do, and why I have it tuned the way that I do, because it makes playing those big, nice chord voicings a little bit easier than on a typical 4-string or a 5-string with that lower note. Instead, I can go higher and get all kinds of nice high notes up there to sort of top the chords. So, little info on chords on the bass for you.
Awesome. This next one, I handpicked this one because I think you're going to like this one.
All right.
This is from Douglas Steiner. How do you set the bass in a mix? This is right up your alley, I know.
Indeed. So for a lot of you guys watching, I also, in addition to being a bass player, I am a recording engineer and record producer and do quite a bit in the studio. Awesome question, Douglas. My personal trick, there's 1,000 ways to do it, compression and boatloads of it is typically how I go about it. I mean, you always want to start with a good player on a good instrument going through a good signal chain. So if that means a nice DI or a decent preamp or what have you, you want all that to be solid. But it's one of the most challenging things because of the nature of low frequencies and how they behave acoustically in a room, and in a circuit, and indeed in a mix. Compression is going to be your best friend, and really setting a pretty aggressive ratio is really where I find where I find it to work best. Setting a pretty high ratio, relatively low threshold, and then playing around with those attack and release knobs to find how you want to sculpt the tone, whether you want it to pump a bunch or just kind of grab the sound and control it. But when you've got that higher ratio, so it's squishing the signal a little bit more, and then you've got that lower threshold, so it's grabbing more of the sound and squishing it to that higher ratio. It's really going to keep the bass sound nice and even and consistent. And that actually brings me to something that I wanted to mention to you guys about this holiday sale. Like they were saying at the beginning, we have these play-along track packs for you. The one that I did was the Flavors of Funk packs. This is 20 funk tunes it features a full band, keyboard, guitar, drums, and 20 tunes, all different styles of funk. The bass one is particularly awesome. There's a bass one and a guitar one. Really, really, really great stuff to play along with and, sort of learn about different funk techniques and practice soloing, whatever you guys want to do. But it featured a couple of my really good friends from an up-and-coming Denver funk band called Analog Sun. George Horn on drums, Eric Luba on keyboard. And both awesome players. It was a ton of fun to make. So if you guys are signing up for that sale or for the year-long membership at the sale price, definitely look out for that track pack. So, and I think that pretty much is going to wrap it up, yeah?